Hey everybody, my name is Julie. I am a data scientist at Twitter, and I'm also the diversity chair for the SciPy Conference. And I wanted to talk to everybody today about the diversity and inclusion initiatives that we've had, and then I also wanted to share some data science that I've done on what we've done and what the SciPy Conference has looked over time. So before I start, I want to say thank you to everybody. The progress that we've made in diversity and inclusion at this conference and within the community would not have been possible without the people on the slide and so many more people. So the diversity committee has been amazing, and they've done so much great work, and I'll talk to what everyone's done in the second half of my talk. And then the SciPy organizers this year have been so wonderful in their support for these diversity initiatives, and we wouldn't be able to do what we've done without them. And then finally, I want to thank some people for helping give feedback on the talk and on the code of conduct, and also on the data analysis. So thanks. Awesome. So in this talk, I'll go over a little bit of background. So I'll talk about the history of the SciPy Conference and why inclusion and diversity are important. I will then get into an analysis that we did around gender diversity and speak through the methodology. And then I'll talk a little bit about the metrics that we developed as a result of the analysis. And finally, I will talk about the inclusion and diversity efforts. So let's look at the SciPy Conference. So whenever people ask me, what is SciPy? I say SciPy is a stack. And it's a community of people who use the stack and develop against it. And it's a conference that supports both the stack and the community. So in 2002, it was the first ever SciPy workshop. And it was called the workshop and not the conference. In 2004, it was renamed to the SciPy Conference. Oh, and by the way, all of these were not here. They're in California. In 2005 is when NumPy was born. And for me, when I think of SciPy, I think of NumPy. And so it's kind of cool that there was the SciPy Conference before NumPy was even a thing. 2007 was the first year where there was a great emphasis on students and scholarships. In 2008, EuroSciPy was the first year, and I think the thing to note here for EuroSciPy, SciPy India, and SciPy Argentina, which I think is now called SciPy Latin America, that SciPy is an international community, and it's really amazing to see people across the globe developing for the stack and using it. In 2010, SciPy moved to Austin, which is exciting. And then in 2011, it was the first time that we had keynote speakers that were women. So Hillary Mason and Caitlin Thaney gave great talks. In 2014, Lorena Barba gave a keynote. In 2016, Hannah Hollek gave a keynote. And I did not have enough room on the slide, but 2017, Katie Huff. So we've come a long way from the very first workshop, which is, I guess, a single room at Caltech, and to here we are at 700-person conference. So why are we talking about inclusion and diversity here? Why does it matter? So there have been lots of studies that have shown that diverse teams increase innovation. And everything about the SciPy stack is to be innovative, to create more for the stack, and to use the stack to innovate. And there have been studies that shown that women technologists have a much broader range of backgrounds. So if you look at a typical software developer who's a woman, she may not have come in through a traditional four-year CS degree. She might have come in through, say, a coding boot camp or a different field where she just got really into web development and now she's a developer. And having that kind of difference in backgrounds is really beneficial for when you're trying to innovate. They did a study where they looked at companies from the S&P Composite 1500 list that had women in, and what they found was that those companies that had women in leadership had a $42 million increase in their value. And then another study that I think was also really illuminating is that they looked at banks. And banks that had more racial diversity in leadership made greater financial gains. So in some ways, we talk about this in terms of companies, it increases the bottom line, it improves your ROI. SciPy is not a company, but we are a community of innovators. And so by having more diversity, we increase our innovation. And why is this so? So it turns out that socially diverse groups are better at problem solving than homogeneous groups. And the reason for this is that when you go into a situation where you know you're going to be talking to people that have different backgrounds and different ideas, you know that you will have to work a little bit harder to come to an agreement, to come to consensus, to accomplish whatever goal you seek to achieve. And so people come better prepared, and they come more willing to compromise, and it ends up being better in the end. And I think one thing to note is that like a lot of times when people talk about diversity, that's where they stop. And we can't really talk about diversity without talking about inclusivity. So diversity is what gets all these folks here. Inclusivity means that they'll come back to the conference year after year, and they'll participate, and they'll give talks, and they'll be in the sprints, and they'll contribute to the stack, and they'll use it. So let me talk a little bit about some analysis that we did in order to like look at this. So in my day job, I am a data scientist, and so when people tell me things, I'm always like, show me the evidence. And so a lot of people talk about diversity, and people say, oh, it's been so much better than it has in years before, but has it? So I wanted to look into the numbers and see if that was actually true. So what we did was we looked at the gender diversity of SciPy Conference speakers. And the reason why is because we wanted to measure where we were, so where are we coming from, where we are today, and then figure out from that, where do we want to go to make the SciPy community thriving and growing. So the way that I'll talk about through the methodology, but like the sort of overall framework was we did a little bit of data collection and a lot of cleaning. We did name classification. We explored the data, and then we performed a statistical examination of the gender diversity of speakers. And by speakers, I do mean like people who are speaking. We didn't look at posters. But I also am including tutorials and keynotes as well. And we also made sure that we counted everyone. So if there were multiple authors on a talk, then they were all included. So what did data collection look like? So what we did was we scraped SciPy Conference websites. It turns out that some of them are no longer easily available on the internet. So we used the Wayback Machine to get to some of those. The HTML for that is not nice. We also looked at external data sources because we wanted to compare ourselves to other communities. So we looked at the Stack Overflow Developer Survey. We have a nice data set from the NSF to look at the graduation rate of folks in science and engineering. So we specifically chose math and computer science, physical science and earth science, and engineering, since it seems to be the communities where we pull the most talks from. I looked at this tweet, and I asked them, like, does anybody know what the PyCon diversity numbers were for speakers? And somebody pointed me to this tweet from Jessica McKellar, who's the diversity chair of PyCon. And then from there, we did data cleaning. And the way that we did this is we used requests to get to a lot of the SciPy Conference websites. We used Beautiful Soup to parse, and also these hands, because the HTML, again, was real messy. And so sometimes it was just easier to copy-paste and sit there, and it's fine. You listen to music. And from the data cleaning, we used our data records, and we identified the authors, the author names, and then what talks they had given. So what we did with those names was classify them. So the way that we did this was we used a Social Security name data set to create probability distributions. The name data set is for every year. There's accounts of names for Social Security card applications. And it's assigned by sex assigned at birth. We assumed that each speaker was 30 plus or minus 5 years for each conference year, and so we looked at the year of their birth up until this year in the name data set. And the reason why is it's kind of interesting when you look back in time, the diversity of names gets much smaller. And so by doing that, we were able to have a greater range of the names that we could classify against. One thing to note about the Social Security name data set is that A, it's US only, and because of Social Security cards, and B, if the name is too uncommon, it's not going to be in the data set. So if like for 1 year there's only like one person named Ramona, like it's not going to show up for privacy reasons. And so this is like kind of a messy data cleaning and data parsing task. So we did hand check our failures, and one of them were reasons why was Unicode. So there are a lot of folks here, again, because this is an international community, that have characters in their names that are not always so fun to parse in Python. So I do want to say like one big like kind of caveat. There's like a big issue to this. So the goal of the diversity committee is to make the SciPy conference more diverse and also more inclusive. And by doing this name classification between like male and female based on speaker names, we're being very not inclusive to the trans community. And why is that? It's because we're gendering people without their input. Their names don't necessarily reflect gender identity. The way somebody looks in a picture doesn't reflect their gender identity. And it's so much better if people self-identify. We also here are assuming that gender is binary, and it's not, it's fluid. And in a name data set that has male and female, that's not something that like is reflected at all. Again, the Social Security name data set is based on US names alone, and we're not just a community based in the United States. We're an international community. And then finally, this just doesn't help with other dimensions of diversity. You can't infer race, you can't infer age from any of this information. And so while this is like really uncomfortable, and I never want to gender people again on their first names, I think that this is something that we needed to do as a stepping stone. So our solution for not gendering people in the future is by collecting optional demographic information so folks can self-identify. And the way that we want to monitor how we're doing in other dimensions of diversity is we're asking questions about gender identification, race, age, and location, I believe. And again, all of these are optional. You don't have to tell us, but if you do tell us, it will help us so much to monitor how we're doing and how our diversity efforts are helping. And then again, the other thing that we did was we hand-check failures. One really interesting example is the name Jan. So in the US, Jan is like mostly women. It's like, I think like 99%. But most of the folks who present at SciPy are not named Jan, they're named Jan, and they're from Europe. And so these were cases in which we needed to go through. So like some years it's like really exciting, like, oh, there are like a lot of women speakers. It's like those are Jans. So yeah. So what does this end up looking like? So let's just look at the gender ratio of speakers. So it's kind of hard to see, I guess, in some of, actually it's probably not that hard to see. The gender ratio is not that great, but it's like improved over time. In 2005, it looked like it was maybe really good, then it went back down again, and then in 2012, it was really bad, and then we started to increase again. And this year, and I'm like really happy to say, we have the highest ratio of women speakers that we've ever had at a conference. And so was 2005 a really particularly good year? Like what was going on there? Well, it turns out that you can also just count the number of women speakers, and that's not the best, but it does show that we're improving, and we're always pushing to like make sure that we're more inclusive, that we're reaching out to more folks, try to get more people up here on the podium that say look like me. So how do we compare to other tech communities? So if you look at the NSF PhD data, it's pretty constant, around 25%. If you look at PyCon had similar problems to SciPy, where there are very few women speakers, but they have started pushing really hard on diversity initiatives around 2011, and they have been very, very successful in their efforts. If you look at the Stack Overflow data, it's kind of shocking. I expected much higher numbers, but only about like 4 to 6% of the respondents over time have been women. And I think the reasons for this are sort of selection effect. You have to have an account, you have to self-identify, and you also have to actually fill out the survey. And so I think that these are sort of good comparison points because like a lot of us are from academia, a lot of us who are from industry were previously in academia, and so the NSF data set sort of makes sense. A lot of us are developers, and so we'll answer the Stack Overflow survey and debate tabs versus spaces, and a lot of us go to PyCon as well. So what can we kind of do with this information? So is the gender ratio that we're getting, did it happen like at random, or was it because of just the makeup of the people that we draw from for our speaker population? So there's this great blog post by Lauren Bacon and Greg Martin, and they discuss the likelihood of an all-male panel at a STEM conference. And so what they looked at was like math conferences have panels, and are the panel membership, does that reflect the population from which you would think you would draw panel speakers? And so they looked at the NSF data as well, and they looked at math in particular, because I think they were looking at math conferences, and it was about 24%. And so what they did is they used statistics to determine if the observed ratio was expected or if there was some sort of bias in the selection of speakers. Like, spoiler alert, it was like for reals biased. So can we do this for us? Yes, absolutely we can. So talk presenters should be, in principle, say, randomly selected from a population, and like the population from which they are selected should be reflected in the gender ratio of the presenters. And so we use the NSF Science and Engineering PhD data set for math and computer science, the physical and earth science, and engineering as a population. And so that is about 24% or 25%, so very similar to the math numbers. Selecting speakers is a binomial process because in this gender binary way of looking at things, you're either selecting like a woman speaker, a man speaker. And so we can use a binomial distribution, which is handy. And so the question here is, what is the probability of randomly drawing the number of women speakers or fewer than the number of women speakers that we have in a given year? It's not great. So the probability of drawing like the number of women speakers that we've seen for basically every year except for 2005, but there weren't that many speakers in 2005, is about 0. And in this year, 2017, it's the first year where we broke 1%. So we still have work to do. And although we have more women speakers than we've ever had before, it's great, and it's so awesome to like turn around and see so many a more diverse conference than we've had in the past. There's still a lot of work that we need to do in order to make these numbers better. So what can we do with like all this information, with these plots, with these with this model? In my day job, I spend a lot of time thinking, it might be hard to see that in that previous plot, and so here's a table. So again, these numbers don't look great, right? So I spend a lot of time every day thinking about metrics, how do we move the needle for my company? And so we should be thinking about metrics as well. And I think that this is such a data-focused and data-driven community that this is kind of the right way to think about diversity and inclusion issues. So let's look at year-over-year growth. Let's make sure that we're improving, or we're at least at the same representation as we were this year to the next. Let's look at the probability of speaker diversity ratio and select a better representation of speakers out of the potential speaker population. And then I think this is more dimensionality reduction. It's more kind of a feeling than it is a number, but let attendees focus on the awesome science. I don't want to think about the fact that I'm at SciPy and I'm a woman, or I'm at SciPy and I'm Asian. I just want to come to SciPy and learn about the amazing things that people have been doing, classifying things to figure out who Gossip Girl is. That is what I want to focus on. And so I think that by doing a lot of these diversity initiatives, we'll be able to push on all 3 fronts. So let's talk about the diversity committee at SciPy. So the way that the diversity committee interfaces with SciPy is that we have a whole lot of committee members, and they sit with the chairs of the other organizing committees. And so somebody sits with program chair, somebody sits with communication, somebody sits with another committee. There are lots of them. And so they work to either do particular things that are helpful to that committee and also thinking about diversity and inclusivity, or they will just kind of sit there and organize alongside the committee chair to make sure that the ways in which they are organizing are inclusive. And so I think that it's been a pretty successful model for us, especially this year. We also have scholarships for students. So if you look back further upstream in the pipeline, you always are more diverse earlier on in education. So the scholarships for students are great because we can get a population that is naturally more diverse, and then convince these people that this is the best conference ever, and then they should be part of the community and contribute to open source software. We have a luncheon, and our luncheon is today at 12:15 in the Tejas room there-ish. So Tracy Teal will be giving a talk. She's head of software carpentry, and I'm super excited for that. And then finally, this year, for the first time, we had a teen track. And again, this is kind of getting at like going on earlier in the pipeline and talking to people and getting them really excited, like when they're in high school, to really think about like scientific computing and open source and coding. So another thing that we did this year was we revamped our code of conduct in a few different ways. So all of you who are here had to read and accept the code of conduct in order to register. It's part of the registration flow. And we did change like the code of conduct from like years past. And what did we do? So we created language that protect both the physical and online spaces. So it's easy to say like don't like touch people in meet space, but also don't be a bad person on Slack, on Whova, on Twitter, because all of these are sort of part of the community and things that keep the community going. And so it's important that like people are protected anywhere they are in the space. We also included protections against transphobic behavior. There's a bathroom bill in Texas this year. And we also don't have control over the bathrooms here at the conference center. So we wanted to make sure that it was a safe space for folks from the trans community who are also amazing Python developers. And finally, we did things to try to make the code of conduct enforceable so that if there was a violation of the code of conduct, that somebody had an outlet and a way to go to somebody and say, hey, there's a thing that happened, and that there was a way for us as conference organizers to action against it. And then finally, yeah, we appointed official people to contact with code of conduct concerns. So again, it's me, it's Prabhu, it's Serge, it's Jill, and then if it's anybody else, you can go to the registration desk if you can't find us. You can like hip chat it. You can find us on Slack, or my DMs are open. Another thing that we did was we did extensive communication. So we made a concerted effort to reach out to underrepresented and minoritized groups, and we did this throughout our call for proposals to try to encourage people to apply and give talks, and then also through registration. And I think that both of those are crucial to get better representation. And because it's work to like be diverse, it's work to be inclusive, and so these are the efforts that we needed to undertake in order to get where we are today. And we'll continue these efforts and even further as in the next for the next SciPys. We also hosted events with PyLadies chapters to talk about the SciPy Conference, like what it is, like this is what we talked about last year and it was so great. And then also to help with proposal writing. So like these are good ideas, this is like how you write a good proposal, here are examples of accepted proposals. And I think that this is really great for people who are maybe afraid to like submit a talk. They're like, oh, I don't know if I like can do it, you know, and you're like, no, this is like quite easy, it's like a low barrier for entry, like you should do it. This year was the first open review system, and when Lorena was like, we should do this, and the reason why is because it makes the review process more transparent and it builds trust in the community, and then there are studies that indicate that potentially signed reviewers are higher quality. It scared me because I'm like, we're never going to get any more women speakers. But with the help of Celia Sintas, thank you so much. She and Lorena worked together to craft guidelines to help reviewers examine their biases. And what these guidelines talked about was common places in the review process where bias exists, tools to interrupt your bias. I mean, I think one misconception about bias is that like, I'm not biased, I couldn't be. Everybody's biased, but it's a matter of like how you overcome that. And then finally, we provided further resources to like examine the topic more. So like reviewers had more tools ready if they needed it. This year, the diversity committee is like putting on 2 different birds of a feather. So one was yesterday, the state of diversity and inclusion at the SciPy Conference. And this year, the 2 main tracks were SciPy tools and AI machine learning. And the reason why we had 2 BOFs is because we wanted to like talk about like diversity and inclusion in both of these tracks. The next one is tonight at 5:30 here in the Grand Ballroom, and it's keeping bias out of machine learning, which is as we start to make more decisions based on machine learning algorithms, we need to really think about the types of data that we're collecting, the people who are making them, and how we can make sure that we as people who are creating these models aren't actively harming people as a result. We also have sprints every year, and this year we're doing things to try to make sprints more beginner friendly. And we try to do that every year, but this year we did some extra work. We did outreach to groups that support underrepresented and minoritized folks. We developed documents for the sprint leaders to show them kind of what are the steps that you need to take to have a successful sprint and a successful onboarding for especially new especially for new sprinters. And then we'll have a how to sprint session from 9:30 to 12 in room 204 on Saturday. So if you're new to sprinting or you want a refresher course, like please go to that and you can like learn how to sprint. This year there are 6 sprints that are both appropriate for beginners and appropriate for people who don't have familiarity with the package. So if you just like want to sprint and you're not sure how and you're not necessarily sure like what package you want to sprint on, there are 6 sprints that are great for you. And then finally we'll have a concierge and a Slack channel to help guide people who are like confused or lost or they need like a little bit of help so that everybody can have like a really amazing sprint session. So what does the future look like? So this year we're collecting optional demographic information and we'll continue to do so into the future so people can self-identify and so that we can track where we're going. We'll monitor our established metrics. We'll maybe make them better than they were before and perhaps develop new ones. We'll continue our communication efforts and also our event efforts. And we're hoping that in the upcoming years we'll have sort of champions in different regions, not just like in Austin and the Bay Area, but in like other places where there are a lot of tech people and people are interested in coming to SciPy to give talks. We will also continue to evaluate our code of conduct. The world changes very quickly, and so we want to make sure that the code of conduct that we have in place is something that makes SciPy safe and amazing for everyone. And then finally, we really need to focus on other dimensions of diversity. We need to think about things like race and age and like low vision. And these are all different things that like we haven't been able to do as easily before because we just didn't have the information. But now with the demographic information, I think that we'll be able to really start pushing in those directions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. So again, we have time for questions, 2-3 minutes. I can run around to you, and there is a microphone there in the middle. Go ahead.
Great talk. Will there be a chance for people who register for the conference to self-identify? Will like another link be sent around or something like that? Now that we've watched your talk, I think more people would want to self-identify or be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure we could put it in the exit survey.
Hi, great talk. I was wondering if you looked at the statistics regarding like who applied, because like there's a lot of stuff about who was accepted, and you left out the posters, but like, do you know what I mean? Like what may be important is like the ratio.
So I didn't have. Well, I guess I could have gotten access to that data, but I didn't want to look at it because I wanted to have things that were available on the web, just because it's kind of weird to like go and count people and classify them. I think like in the future, that's definitely something that we'll think about. And I mean, the other thing too is like with the demographic information, everybody in here, this is a population from which we're drawing our speakers. So that's probably the more appropriate like gender ratio or whatever ratio to look at. And so between that and then like accepted versus
Yeah, well, we should talk about this later, but actually I would argue that you have like the general population, then one step up is who applied, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like because like not everyone's going to apply, and then one step above that is who got accepted.
Yeah. More
but
metrics.
Anyway, yeah.
Oh, hi, thank you, that was a great talk. I see diversity as a categorical good, so this question is not directed in that direction, but I'm wondering how you would think about metrics that you can use to get a sense for whether diversity has actually given you a better conference in terms of like connections made or what people have learned or so forth.
Sure, yeah, actually, I mean, it's like difficult to do things like in a causal way, but we could probably do things like correlation. So there's this really interesting package that is unfortunately written in R that looks at like Twitter data and it scrapes the Twitter API within a hashtag and it shows like connection. So that might be like one way to look at it. I think like perhaps like we can sort of look at the demographic data and see like how that changes over time and see if like the demographic data from one year like for the conference goers like is that related at all to like the next year's applicants? Like I don't know. These are just like off the top of my head, but definitely.
Great talk. Thank you. Loved it. So you're presented with an opportunity to improve the data you just showed us, right? So all the people that have self-identified from this year's conference, many of them have been to SciPy in the past, and it's possible that they have been miscategorized because their name is like Ryan, but really they're a girl or something like this. Do you think you would go back in your data, once you have all this registration data from this year, and double check that you categorize people correctly according to their name?
Yeah, like definitely.
Sweet.
It's distinctly uncomfortable to gender people.
Yeah.
Like that's just not something I ever wanted to do. But I'm like, I don't know how else to do this, like given the data set. So yeah, that.
Don't beat yourself up. You did great.
Sorry, what? Oh.
I said, don't beat yourself up on that.
Hi. So this is my first time coming to a SciPy conference, and I've been to a bazillion other academic conferences. This is the first time I've seen a code of conduct. So I applaud you for it. I think it was really, I was actually really gratified to see that when I was registering for the conference, because I think it lays a groundwork that is really important. I'm just curious where the motivation came from. Is it from previous challenges or other conferences as a model? I just was surprised to see it pleasantly.
I mean, it's like in a perfect world, nobody would need a code of conduct, and everybody would just be like, "Hey, social contract, we're going to be nice to other people." But that isn't always the case, and there have been incidents at other conferences, like even within the Python community, where having a code of conduct was like really important. So I'm also co-organizer for PyLadies San Francisco, and one of our kind of rules is that if we promote a conference, they have to have a code of conduct. And some of it is because like folks from like underrepresented or minoritized communities often don't feel safe. And so this is like one way to like give them like some layer of assurance that's like, if something happens, like we're here for you. You're not just like on your own.
Hi, so just as like a very brief historical note, Matt Turk and I added the code of conduct, I think in 2011, it might have been 2012. And this was because, largely inspired by the PyCon code of conduct. And so we went and said to Andy, who was the conference organizer at the time, like, this is something we need to have. And so that's why we have a code of conduct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I went to a conference, a workshop last year in North Carolina, and just before I got there was a lot of soul searching among the conference organizers, excuse me, whether to cancel or move it or anything over the controversies there. Just guessing that maybe this controversy in Texas might continue into the future. One of the reasons that the people in North Carolina decided to go ahead is that they thought the presence of that workshop would actually reach out to the local community, and they tried to set up some contacts with the community to let them know that people attending the workshop were there to support the community. So moving forward, that might be something that this conference might be able to think about doing just for Austin and Texas in general.
Yeah, for sure. I think that like the way that the bathroom bill is like structured, or at least the last time I looked at it in Texas, institutions like the AT&T Center can make their own policy. And so like that's why we put, I forgot that. We put menstrual products in both bathrooms since we don't have control over the bathrooms here, just in case. And so like that, like the reason why we could do that here, even like once like the bathroom bill, if the bathroom bill hopefully doesn't pass, but if it does, like we'll continue to do things like that if the conference is still in Austin.
I'm going to have to step up and suggest that we continue this awesome conversation at BOFs at the luncheon. So let's thank Julie again, and we can have some food.